Hi there. Today I'm going to take a look at automated scalping within Fairbot, specifically the two ways that you can go about doing it. Ultimately what I want to do is provide you with a baseline position that you can then adapt and modify to suit whatever market it is you wish to scalp. So if we bring up the strategy editor, you'll see I've already created an empty strategy. Let's just first of all create the initial rule. I'm going to create two separate rules, one for each method. But you should be aware you shouldn't use them together, although theoretically I suppose you can. But you may find some conflicts between the two. So the first one is something that uses the repeat on success functionality that's built into the trading mechanism within Fairbot. So I'll just call this rule repeat on success. We'll just leave all the start and stop times as the defaults. And if we go to the action tab, the thing that you need to do is use place a trade. Placing a trade is the only way you can get access to the repeat on success because it's actually part of that functionality. All the usual stuff when you're setting up an action, you've got to choose a selection. I'm going to choose all. In other words, we're going to potentially scalp every single competitor in a market. Obviously, if you only want to trade on the favourite, for example, you would choose and configure best back odds and all that sort of thing. But we're going to choose all because we don't know which one we're going to trade or scalp, and we're going to use conditions to help us identify that. So we've all selected here. We also need to make sure that we choose apply to all. That's something you should all be familiar with by now if you've watched any of my earlier videos. Set up all the usual stuff, so we choose whatever odds. Let's just choose best back odds. We'll leave it as the current market position, but obviously you can offset that up and down. Specify the offset that you want for your trade. Let's just go with 3 ticks. So we're looking for 3 tick scalps. Specify the amount, all the usual stuff that you're familiar with. I'm going to ignore stop loss for this particular video and jump straight to repeat on success, where we can specify something called a repeat count. Now, just to make sure everyone's aware, the repeat on success only works with the back to lay or lay to back type trade. The repeat count is in addition to the original trade. So once your initial trade is configured and matched, both the initial bet and the offset, when that trade completes, the repeat on success kicks in. So if you set a repeat count of 4, what actually happens, assuming that the loops, the iterations all go through, you end up creating 5 trades. Also specify a fill or kill. Let's just pop that to 20 seconds, but obviously that's going to depend on the market. If you're scalping a fast in-play horse race, for example, you may want to cut that down somewhat. And that's essentially it, all the basic stuff. Now what we're going to do, because I'm using apply to all in order to specify our back to lay trade, we're going to essentially look at potentially trading every single runner. So we need to limit that somehow, and of course we can do that by specifying conditions. So let's just assume we're going to only trade those runners whose odds are less than 10. So again, because I'm using apply to all, I need to choose all there. Make sure the best back odds are less than or equal to 10. And that's essentially the basic scalping rule that you would require if you're using repeat on success. Obviously there's other conditions and so on that you might want to put in there depending on which market you are trading. The other option available to you as far as setting up an automated scalping mechanism is by using the rule execution count. So if I just copy and paste that one, we'll just go in and edit that. So this one's going to be rule execution count. Again, I'll just leave the start times as all the defaults. Go to the action. We still have to place a trade because it's a trade that we're doing, so it's going to be all. That's been picked up from the copy and paste, so we don't need to change that. Back to lay's fine, choose that, that's all good. What we need to do, however, is switch off repeat on success. You could have it on if you wish, but that's going to lead to all sorts of confusing things that might happen during a particular event. But I'm going to leave filler kill set to 20. Now, the way that we create the looping, the iterations, is we use the execution count. So keep in mind when we did repeat on success, we had a repeat count of 4 plus the initial trade, so that would be 5. So let's run this rule 5 times and put a wait time after execution. Now, it's set to 10. I changed the killer fill to 20. If you leave it at 10, you potentially have a situation where you've got multiple trades going in that are in the market at the same time, which is generally speaking not what you want when you're scalping. So you really need to set this to slightly longer than the killer fill that you have specified. In addition to that, you will want to add in extra conditions. So there's the original condition that we copied as part of the first rule. What you may actually want to do as well is to set up a selection bet count condition as well. So again, in this case, choose all. Now we're applying a back to lay trade. Now if we put in a back to lay trade, what we want to do, because of the potential for the rule to fire a number of times and put in multiple versions of the trade, we wish to stop that using this selection bet count. So what we're going to do is make sure that the selection number of bets is equal to 0. In other words, it has to be 0 before a trade is submitted by this rule. We wish to check back to lays, whether they're unmatched. Now, the way I've configured the killer fill in conjunction with the rule execution count interval, because that's longer than the killer fill, that should take into account any backs that are sitting in the market. But just for a point of view of safety, it's worthwhile leaving that in there. Specifically what this will do is that if the initial opening position for a trade has been taken and the lay is still waiting to be matched, because the killer fill doesn't apply to that side of the trade, remember. If that offset is still sitting in the market, this selection bet count won't be equal to 0, and therefore subsequent executions of the rule will not kick in until such times that's been taken. So make sure you've got that unmatched switched on. If you're using offsets and so on, just for completeness, you might want to switch that on, and pending stop losses and all that sort of thing. But generally speaking, there isn't any real need to, because once that has cleared, those will disappear anyway. So that's perhaps the major difference that you need to incorporate within this rule compared to the previous one. So let me just click on OK. So we've now got two rules that essentially do the same thing. However, there is subtle differences between the way these things work. Now, if you're familiar with how that happens and the differences between the two, I suggest you go off and have a cup of tea for the next 10 minutes whilst I present something else that I prepared earlier to explain the differences. A picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say, so I'm going to use this graph taken from a recent tennis match to illustrate the difference between the inbuilt repeat and success functionality and simulating that process using the rule execution count. So let's consider repeat on success first of all. When we place a trade, if we configure repeat on success, we can get that trade to be repeated each time it completes. So let's say, for example, I enter the market at 1.8, just below the current odds. And I have an offset for that trade of 0.1 in terms of odds. So we'd end up with a pending bet stuck in here. A pending bet, of course, is managed by Fairbot. It's not seen by Betfair. Betfair doesn't know about it. So as the market comes down, this lay bet that's sitting in the market unmatched will get matched there. That will cause this pending bet to be submitted by Fairbot at the same time. And that's the point where Betfair knows about it. And that will remain in the market as an unmatched bet until such times as it's matched or it's cancelled by you. So that's going to get matched when the market comes back up to 1.9. So that's going to get matched there. When that gets matched, that will then cause the repeat on success to fire in another trade. And it's exactly the same trade as before. So it enters the market at 1.8. A pending bet is configured by Fairbot. And this lay that we've got in here will get matched when the market comes back down to 1.8, which causes that new pending bet to become a submitted bet, which will sit there until such times as it gets matched in the market when the market comes back up to 1.9. And so the process continues. That gets matched, a new lay to back trade gets it placed there with its corresponding pending bet in there, and there it will sit and not be matched because of the way the market moves. One other thing to notice, however, is that if we had a killer fill configured, let's say we had a killer fill that would kill the bet over that period there. Now clearly this one would get matched. This one, however, wouldn't get matched because it will get killed there. As a result, these bets here would disappear. So they would be killed, this bet here would be killed at that point, and so the process would stop. That's important to recognise, that a killer fill configured as part of the repeat on success process kills a sequence completely. It doesn't just kill that particular trade that's been put in, it will stop the repeat on success. Even if you have 50 repeats configured and it only does 3, it will stop the process in its tracks. Now it's important to note that as these things get matched and subsequent trades get put in as part of the repeat on success process, when a trade is completed, you have no control over when the next iteration in the loop is submitted. It's effectively submitted immediately, keeping in mind any in-play delays and so on. You have no control over that. The important thing to take from here is that with the repeat on success, each trade is the same. The entry point in terms of odds is the same. And there's no way you can control the gaps between those submissions. Now compare that with using the rule execution count settings to essentially simulate the same sort of process. Let me just change colour here so we can separate the two. There's possibly 3 important points that you should be aware of when you try to do this type of thing using the rule execution count. And that is, first of all, if you've got a killer fill configured, it does not kill future trades going in. In addition to that, you have control over the gap between when a trade is successful and a new trade is submitted. And as you'll see shortly, the other thing is that it follows the graph. It doesn't all go in at the same point. So let's do a similar thing here. We'll move over a little bit just to keep everything separate. So let's say, for example, I submit a trade in here. Let me see, let's go to here. So we submit a trade in there at 2.1. Same sort of thing, we want a pending bet 0.1 higher. That lay will get matched there. The pending bet becomes a submitted bet at that point, which then gets matched there. So that then completes the first loop. If you've got killer fill on, you can configure a rule execution count mechanism to submit the next bet sometime after that killer fill has expired. So for example, let's say we had a 10-second killer fill, the bet is matched, but we set the rule execution count interval to 20 seconds. The next iteration in that loop will not go in for another 10 seconds. So that's the first thing, the first difference between rule execution count and repeat on success. So this trade here has been successful. So let's say we had a bit of a gap of a few seconds. So the next lay won't be submitted until here. But you'll see here we're looking at something like, what, 0.5 in odds in terms of our offset from the current market position. So the same thing will happen, 0.5, we're going to get a lay bet put in here with this offset here. Now that lay bet won't get matched within its time frame, so it will cancel. But the next bet will still be submitted. It's not cancelled like repeat on success. So we'll end up with another lay going in here with its submitted pending bet up here. This one will get matched immediately after, just because of the sharpness of the fall of the odds. That will get matched. The pending bet will become a submitted bet. That will get matched there. So again, we might have a delay. So we end up with the next lay going in here, the submission going here, and so on and so forth. This one here will get killed because it doesn't get matched. So the next bet will actually get submitted away up here. And so on. It will get matched there. The pending bet will become a submitted bet there, which will then get matched at this point, and so on along the list. The important thing to note here is that the rule execution count method follows the trend of the graph, unlike the repeat on success. So killer fill doesn't kill everything in the loop. It doesn't kill all iterations, but you can control the iterations using conditions, as you would control anything else. And the rule execution count method follows the graph relatively closely, whether it's going up or down. And that's a big difference, and that's why I like it. That's why I prefer it over repeat on success. Repeat on success is useful in markets where you know there's an upper and lower limit, a fairly tight upper and lower limit within the odds range that moves over time. In that situation it can be useful, but I much prefer the rules execution count method. With that explanation out of the way, hopefully you're a bit clearer on the difference between the two. What I'm trying to show here is that the rule execution count, in my opinion, is much more powerful and flexible in terms of the way you configure your scalping and the way it operates. Number of things that's worthwhile pointing out. When the repeat on success happens, each iteration happens immediately after a trade is closed off, when the offset is taken. You've got no control over that, whereas you do with the rule execution count. In addition, the conditions that you specify for any rule are a way of controlling when the rule executes. It's got nothing to do with whatever action that you're carrying out. So even if you've got to specify here where we have the odds of our selections, it should be less than or equal to 10. Once that repeat on success rule fires, that's it. So even if other competitors drop below 10 that weren't below 10 when the rule fired, they will not be part of any betting. No trades will be submitted for them. Whereas with the rule execution count, that will be the case. Essentially what each iteration of this rule does is it checks the conditions, and whatever competitor matches those conditions, that rule will fire for that competitor. So if the initial rule execution count bet, the very first one, it finds that, obviously the bottom half of the market is above 10, so none of those will be involved in any of the trading. But if the market conditions change such that one or two of those drop below 10, in subsequent iterations, if that's the case, then a trade will be placed on that competitor. That does not happen on repeat on success. So in my opinion, the rule execution count method is much more flexible. You've got much greater control over what's happening and what competitors, what selections actually get involved in any of your scalping. So I think it's a much more powerful tool. In addition to that, if you ever within an automation have a green up all function, or perhaps a cancel all bets function, that type of thing, the green up all can be configured to cancel existing outstanding bets in the market. Now if you use repeat on success, keep in mind that that repeat on success functionality runs in the background. So your initial trade that has a repeat on success assigned to it, once that fires, that repeat on success is just sitting in the background churning along until such times as you either cancel it, it's completely exhausted through all its repeat counts, or kill and fill kicks in. If you have a cancel all rule or a green up all rule that's configured to cancel existing unmatched bets, sometimes what will happen is if Fairbot's in the process, and this is particularly true in in-running markets, if Fairbot's in the process of carrying out another iteration of the repeat on success, your green up all or your cancel rule will sometimes miss that happening. So the repeat on success ends up putting in another iteration. So you may have to make sure that your green up all functionality fires a number of times. But even then, depending on what the market conditions are and so on and so forth, you may find an additional repeat on success going in winds up putting you in a negative position where before, seconds earlier, you were in a good position. That can't happen with the rule execution count if you've configured your conditions correctly to prevent that from happening. So as I say, I much prefer the rule execution count mechanism, primarily because it follows the market rather than always going in at the same level. But that's a personal preference. I would suggest you use these basic rules and adapt them to suit whatever it is you're trying to do, and test them on whatever market you're playing with, and see what suits you. But I think you'll probably find that the rule execution counter is by far the most powerful. Okay guys, thanks very much for watching. I hope that helps with your automated scalping. Cheers.